Hi, everyone. It's good to be back again. This is my third session today. So was anyone in either of the other two? And you're back. Wow, you guys are really like suckers for punishment. Whew. All right, well, look, fine. Maybe you just wanted to have a nap. That's why you're here. Who knows? My name is Jo. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm from Perth, Western Australia. That's why I have a funny accent. And I'm really excited to be here today, particularly talking about one of my favorite things in the world, which is UX research. And in particular today, I'm going to be talking about what UX research looks like or might look like in the next few years in a world where AI is starting to kind of encroach on pretty much everything that we do. Now, I've been working as a web developer for around 10 years now. I have been working as a software developer coming up for 5 years. And a couple of years ago, I decided to round it out because I get bored very easily. And I decided to get my UX research certification with Nielsen Norman Group. If you haven't heard of them, they're an excellent research and training organization that focuses very much on UX research. Now, my background before I career switched was in process engineering, and I'm really passionate about making data-driven decisions. And one of the biggest challenges that I faced when I moved into the development space was that it felt like a lot of the decisions we were making were essentially just guesswork, and that didn't really sit right with me. So when I discovered UX research was an option, I got really excited about how I could transfer some of those data analysis skills that I had developed over years of working in this data analysis sphere into a domain that is often a bit ephemeral, right? It's a bit hard to measure. So I really wanted to embrace how could we measure these things that were very difficult to measure. And so what is UX research is the first question. What does that look like? And the answer is like so many different things. But generally speaking, it's the systematic empirical study of target users including their behaviors, including their needs and their motivations, so that we can inform and improve our product designs. And there's dozens of formal UX research methodologies out there. And a popular way to visualize these is in what we refer to as a three-dimensional framework. And it looks something like this. So on this framework, we have 3 different ways that we are measuring stuff. The first way is on the scale of behavioral to attitudinal. So what does that mean? There's a distinction between attitudinal and behavioral can be summed up by contrasting 2 sides of a coin. What do people do and what do people say? And in UX research, the thing that we care about the most is usually what people do. And those things you might think are the same, but they're definitely not. What people say often is, in fact, the opposite of what they actually do when you put a product in front of them. It's why I'm sure that you've all heard the saying, if we asked people what they want, they would have said faster horses. So it's much better for us if we can look at the way that people are interacting with software and what they're doing, rather than asking them for their opinion about something. So an example of like an attitudinal technique is card sorting. And this is a technique where basically we're trying to get insights about users' mental models to get a little bit of an understanding about how they visualize an information space. Other examples of attitudinal studies are things like surveys, focus groups, that sort of thing. And behavioral studies on the flip side are things like A/B testing or eye tracking. They're really easy to measure, but they're also, which is a bonus, but they're also telling us about how people interact with something. We're watching them and seeing what they actually do. And then we have things that are in the middle. We have usability studies and field studies where we're both watching what people do and asking them about it and asking their opinions about things as we go. So it's not necessarily one or the other. There are lots of different methodologies out there that are combining the two together. So then we look at our next scale, which is quantitative versus qualitative. And quantitative usability testing is typically focusing on collecting metrics that describe the user experience. So for example, task success rate or the time on task, right? Whereas qualitative usability is focusing more on collecting insights. It's helping us get findings and anecdotes about how people are using a product or service. Examples of qualitative studies are things like interviews, usability testing, field studies, and focus groups. And on the flip side, we've got quantitative things like surveys, A/B testing, and analytics. And again, we've got stuff that falls in the middle. We've got, again, card sorting and tree testing, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And these have both qualitative and quantitative aspects, depending on how they're facilitated. So this is kind of what they look like when you put them on a little bit of a chart. You've got what people do versus what people say on one axis, and why and how to fix, so the qualitative side of things, versus how many and how much. But the third one is a little bit harder to visualize, and that is the context of use. And so the context of use are we putting a platform or a piece of software in front of someone and getting them to just use it in the way that they normally would? So an example of that might be like a field study, where it's near natural use of the product, where minimizing interference, and that's going to give us greater validity. But the flip side of that is that we don't necessarily control what users are doing. So if we have specific questions that we want answered, then we might be out of luck. So what we often turn to is scripted use of products. And the scripted use of products, basically, we're focusing the insights of our users on specific product areas. So, for example, we might do a usability study and ask users to conduct a specific task so that we can see how they use a particular part of our software. We also have limited access, where maybe we give them a part of something. So a good example of this is tree testing, where we might just isolate the navigation only and get users to go through and try and find something without looking at it in the greater context of how it fits into the rest of our UI. We also have examples where we don't give them the product at all. So surveys about how they react to a brand, for example. So these are a bunch of different UX research methods. And I'm just going to briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with all of these, talk about what some of them might be used for. And hopefully, as you're thinking about what these things might be used for, I want you to think in your head about, like, is this something that I could get an LLM or an AI agent to help with? So we have field studies. These are really good if you're like developing a new system for a team or you're improving an existing one. And you want to just really sit there and kind of see, how does someone actually use this in their day-to-day workplace? Or how does a customer actually use this particular thing? Interviews and surveys, we can get sentiment analysis. They can be really good for that. But it can also just be like, what are the things that you do most often, right? Participatory design. We give users a bunch of different design building blocks, and we get them to show us what they think the best design looks like. Concept testing. Maybe we take a Figma mock-up of an idea, put it in front of potential customers or users and say, what do you reckon? Is this something that you could use? Like, is it worth us investing time and effort into? Card sorting and tree testing, these are techniques that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to talk a bit about them in a moment, because there's some really interesting analysis that's been done about how we can use AI in this. But these two things usually go together, and they're used to uncover mental models of how people visualize information architecture. Usability testing. This typically involves facilitated, scripted use of a platform to answer research questions, and it's one of the most popular and effective methods of qualitative UX research. I personally do a lot of usability testing. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I'll be talking a bit more about this one and where AI might fit into that as well. Lastly, we've got things like benchmarking, A/B testing, analytics, eye tracking. These are all structured methodologies predominantly used in quantitative testing, and they're often used to compare either like old with new, or maybe against competing projects. It could be comparing your own two designs with A/B testing, or it could be comparing something that you've created against a competitor. So let's have a talk about card sorting. Has anyone participated in a card sorting study before? Nobody? All right. So in a nutshell, what happens with card sorting, if you imagine I've got eBay, right? And I'm going to take 100 of the products from eBay and I'm going to put a photo and the name of the product and I'm going to give them to a bunch of different people. And I'm going to ask those people, can you please categorize these into groups that make sense for you? And if that sounds like hell, then you understand card sorting now. Because it is a little bit messy, and for that reason, a lot of researchers don't particularly enjoy doing it. It's really hard to collate that data. Imagine how many different variations you're going to get because everyone has a different opinion on how they should be sorted. Historically, we did this in person using sticky notes. In the last sort of 5 to 10 years, it has become the norm to just do it with dedicated digital tools. And platforms that allow both the sorting to happen and also the analysis of the results. And I'll show you what they look like in a second. It's predominantly a quantitative technique, and it needs to be done with at least 20 users for you to get any kind of result that is going to give you a reliable mental model forming, something that's reproducible, and ideally you want to have more than that. So Measuring You, which is a research and software firm based in Denver, Colorado, they decided, what if we could do a card sorting study and then also do a card sorting study with ChatGPT and see how close they were? So what do you reckon happened? Hands up if you think it was successful. Hands up if you think it was an absolute failure. Hands up if you think it was like maybe somewhere in the middle. All right. So what they found, here's just briefly what they did. They took 200 responses from humans. So they actually did more than that with humans, but to kind of even the playing field, because AI is not great with images and image recognition, or at least not to the same level that it is with text, is that they only took the responses where they hadn't shown people pictures. So they took 200 responses from humans where they had given 40 products to these humans, and they had said, please categorize these. They were from the Best Buy website, which I think is a thing in America, I'm not really sure. And they provided ChatGPT with the same 40 products and in a randomized order, and they asked it to sort them using as many categories as it wanted and to describe the categories, which is exactly what they asked the humans to do. And ChatGPT used 5 categories. The first time that they did it, used 5 categories to sort the 40 items based on the primary function or usage of each item. And you know what? So did the humans. Because in the card sorting exercise, about 25% of those 200 humans also sorted the items into 5 groups, and they were very similarly named in most cases. It was the most common number of groups in the human study, so the mode in the human study was the same as what ChatGPT came up with. The overall match rate for the first round, if we take the number of items that matched between the groups, the number of matches divided by the total number of items was 63%. They repeated this. They did it again a couple of times, slightly different prompts, and repeating the matching exercise with the 2 additional groupings, they found respective match rates of 77% and 65%. So the overall average there was about 68% across the 3 runs. So was anyone in the last talk? I think she mentioned statistics. There's a lot of statistics in UX research, so I'm summarizing this heavily for you right now. But the expected match rate by chance is 21%. So it's definitely doing significantly better than chance. But we use specific measurement techniques in UX research to identify whether or not something is reproducible and whether it's reliable enough to be making decisions on. And one of the things that we use for this is a value called kappa, and the kappa across these 3 runs is 0.6. And this is considered substantial agreement. So this is actually a really good score. So ChatGPT did a pretty solid job. Now, this is actually, I think, maybe a couple of years old now, so chances are high that it's actually slightly better now than it was when this study was originally done. So this is what it looks like. The one on the left is called a dendrogram, and that's what it looks like when you do it with humans. And the thing that you get on the right is what happens when you do it with ChatGPT. So I don't know about you guys, but for me, one of those is much easier to read than the other. much easier to interpret. So think about the fact that you would have to have at least 20 users to participate in a study for card sorting, and that at the end of it, they're not all going to agree. You're going to have to analyze it, you're going to have to put it through processing tools, and even after all of that, there's a good chance that you're not going to have confidence that you've got the right answer, because there isn't necessarily one right answer. That's why everyone's answers have been different. Mental models are a really tricky thing to measure. So if we move on from card sorting, there's a reason why card sorting and tree testing are two UX research methods that almost always go hand in hand, and that's because tree testing is an evaluation technique where we essentially work out how effective our card sorting actually was. And in tree testing, we take usually like a navigation or something. This is a eucalyptus tree, by the way. This is where koalas live, in case anyone was wondering. So we often, with tree testing, will take something like a navigation menu, and what we want to do is we pose a bunch of tasks to the users and ask them to find stuff. Like, it's as simple as that. We do want to try and phrase the tasks in very specific ways, very similar to usability testing. You want to kind of try and avoid leading people. So, for example, if I'm trying to see if users can find a feedback form on my website, I might ask something like, you had a bad experience at a retail outlet, find the page where you would submit your complaint. So I'm not using the term feedback or form or something like that. I'm kind of trying to give them enough information that they know what the task is without actually telling them where they would find it. And then we just watch and we say, okay, how many click-throughs did they need to be able to find the thing? Could they find the thing? Was it in the first place that they looked? And then we just measure how effective the navigation that we came up with is. And with a study like this, it isn't really practical to just feed the data into ChatGPT and ask it to give us an answer, right? We're looking for real-world information about whether an application actually works and whether humans can find things, because it's UX research and the U stands for user. And usually finding those things, like finding whether or not that is a good result that we got out of our card sorting, knowing that either saves us or makes us money because people can find products faster or something like that. Usability testing is another example of something that doesn't really fit the plugin and LLM model. Usability studies are basically asking users to complete a series of activities that test discoverability or findability or usability or engagement or a combination of those things. And a good usability study only requires 5 humans per cycle. Like 5 humans. It's not very many. It's why I love it so much. And you can uncover over 85% of the UX problems in your system with just 5 users. Like with tree testing, usability studies are an evaluation technique. One of these is qualitative, one of them is quantitative, but in both cases, the only way that we could replace humans with AI would be to use something called synthetic users. So what if I didn't need users to do user research? What if I could just replace the users with AI? Do you think it would work? Hopefully not. Like, if you think it should work, I'm really sorry, but we're not there yet, and I don't know if we ever will be. One of the hardest parts of conducting user research, and I 100% understand why the idea of synthetic users is so attractive, because it's hard to recruit participants. It can be expensive, it takes time, it costs money. Depending on your recruiting process, it can result in poor data, no-shows. You can have participants who shouldn't have made it through in the first place and are going to make your data just like all over the place. So the idea of synthetic users is really attractive. It's quite dreamy from an administration perspective. You don't have to worry about them, like getting them to sign waivers, or are they going to show up on time? Do they have dodgy Wi-Fi? And, halfway through, we're going to have to cancel, and I'm going to have to write that one off and do another one. You can also cherry pick your users. This is nice because we do this in UX research. We don't want to test with just anybody. We don't want to test with other developers, for example. Other developers typically make absolutely terrible usability testing participants because when you are testing something, you are not looking at it in the context of like, what would the user do? Because you're not typically the user. You're looking at it in the context of, how would I do this better? what technology do you reckon they used here? Like, you're approaching it with a very different mindset. Unless your tool is legitimately a developer tool, then maybe your developer is a good person to do usability testing with. But for the most part, if we're talking about websites or platforms or SaaS products or anything like that, typically you want to have people who are, for example, have low technology proficiency. People who don't speak whatever the language that it's built in is as a first language. So if it's an English platform, find people that are not English first language to do your usability testing with. Find people that have learning disabilities. These people make excellent choices for participants for usability studies, and the reason is because if we can make a platform delightful for these users, then everyone is going to have a superb time on your platform. It's the same reason why accessibility is good for everybody. AI-generated synthetic users promise to be simpler, less costly, faster, scalable, and more secure. They are unicorn participants that meet every single one of our criteria because we are the people that define their personas from the start. Perfect, right? And there are platforms out there like Qualtrics and Aru already that are offering synthetic users as a service. You can go and do this right now. You can go and pay a robot to complete your survey. Sounds wild, right? And they're trained on millions of survey responses, and they can allegedly, realistically mimic human survey patterns for attitudinal surveys. And for something like card sorting, this might be fine, right? But the problem is that synthetic data, much like this hand, is not real data. The concept of synthetic data rests on the common assumption that surveys are about sampling a true state of affairs in the world. Quick show of hands, have you ever lied in a survey? Yeah. What about like something maybe a bit more nuanced? Have you ever done one of those personality profiling things like the DISC study or what's that other one, like Myers-Briggs, right? And they've got these questions in there that are like, which better describes you? I hate these questions because I always look at them and I'm like, both of them describe me or neither of them describe me. But you still have to pick one because that's the way that the survey works. So you're inputting fake data, and that data is what models are being trained on. It's also old data because historically LLMs are trained on past data, and the goal of a UX study is to listen to what users think right now. Particularly in today's landscape, our perceptions and interactions with tech change so fast. Like, just for a second, I want you to think about how you would have reacted about something AI related like a year ago or 18 months ago. I guarantee you that the way that you think about it today is wildly different from what you thought about AI 18 months ago, 5 years ago, right? And for most of us, our attitudes on technology move pretty fast. And consider that the models were trained on data that at best, is 6 months old. Like, that's the best case scenario, is trained on 6-month-old data. More realistically, it's trained on 18-month-old data. But it's actually worse than that because they don't remove the old data when they put the new data in. So progressively, that data is becoming more aged, and that is actually going to sway you, particularly if sentiment and responses have changed more frequently. So be really careful because synthetic data is, by definition, going to be old. It's also going to be really biased. This is the guy that is your actual person because AI accuracy in synthetic models has been shown to be much higher for Western, English-speaking, wealthy countries. Significant errors everywhere else, right? AI models are mostly trained on North American and European English language data, which creates systematic bias, simulating perspectives from like Latin America or Asia or Africa, other non-Western contexts is going to be a problem. And it's particularly problematic when one of the primary claimed advantages of synthetic users is improved sample diversity. And one of the biggest challenges with synthetic data is that the only way to know if it is actually realistic is to test it with real humans. And I hope you can understand Why that's really silly, because the only point of using synthetic users in the first place would be so that you could avoid testing with real users. So either existing prior work needs to exist, in which case, why are you doing the study in the first place? Or you're going to have to check it and verify it against real users anyway to know whether or not it's completely made up. So what we found after a comprehensive review of studies around synthetic user research conducted by Measuring You is that while surface results were really promising for synthetic users, when we put them under the microscope, it was really clear that results weren't accurate and they weren't reproducible. And what we found is that LLMs, they might not be able to distinguish, for example, between text that was written by a particular minority group or text that was written about a particular minority group. I hope you can see why that might be a problem and why it might be unsuitable for creating synthetic users to replace actual users for social research. Inherent bias is going to be really problematic. In 2024, a study compared synthetic and human responses to 43 policy questions on topics like climate change, spending and labor in the US, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And the averages for the 43 questions actually were really similar. Like if you looked at the averages on the questions, it worked out pretty well. The problem is that if you actually looked a little bit closer at the actual responses, the variation showed that about 70% of the responses were significantly different. It's just that they were all different in a way that made the averages balance out. So like, it's fine, right? We don't actually care about the detail. And while there aren't many formal studies out there in the use of synthetic users in UX research, because it's not really practical to do yet, in 2025, Capagna et al. Had 19 UX researchers recreate one of their recent projects that they had done with real humans with GPT-4 Turbo. And this is a quote from the study that they did. Initially skeptical, researchers were surprised to see similar narratives emerge in the LLM-generated data when using the interview probe. However, over several conversational turns, they went on to identify fundamental limitations, such as how LLMs foreclose participants' consent and agency, produce responses lacking in palpability and contextual depth, and risk delegitimizing qualitative research methods. Basically, it didn't work. Last night we were talking about correlation versus causation, and someone mentioned the meme, I don't know if you've seen it, about how the decrease in pirates correlates with the increase in global warming, so we need more pirates in the world. That was my reasoning behind the image choice here. But just because the average response on these studies looked the same didn't make the data truly useful. And it's so easy to believe that your results are realistic because studies show that experts can't tell the difference between synthetic personas and human ones, which is really scary. It might sound like a good thing. Surely if we can't tell the synthetic users apart, the data that we get from them is going to be valuable because it's basically the same as the users, right? But the believability can actually be more detrimental because it results in false credibility when more in-depth analysis actually shows that results are shallow, they're lacking in perspective and context, and sometimes they're just blatantly made up. So should we avoid AI altogether? What do you reckon? Tempting, but no, your job is not going to be replaced with AI, but it might be replaced with someone who's using AI tools better than you. So here are 6 ways that you can and should start using AI in UX research. The first one is transcription and note-taking. I know that seems really obvious, but we've been doing this for years, like before ChatGPT was a thing. This was one of the earliest, I think, places where AI technology was embraced in UX research. I will say the one caveat there is don't rely on AI-generated summaries. You're going to miss nuance. So still take notes as you go, focus on keywords, and just like jot them down, and then you can just jump back to that point in the recording at a later date. Or you can show that part of the recording to your boss and tell them why what they wanted is dumb. Focus on research techniques that are predominantly attitudinal if you are going to use AI for things like replacing your card sorting, right? and where existing training data is likely representative. And this is really important. If your target audience is people with a learning disability in Africa, you can't replace your card sorting thing with ChatGPT. You just can't do it because you don't have representative data to train your model on in the first place. But if you have weird users, does anyone know what weird stands for? Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Yeah? If that's your users, if they're a bit weird, then you're going to get much closer to your target audience, and you probably can get away with starting off with your attitudinal study by just skipping that bit a little bit and putting your money more into evaluation studies instead. Scripts, documentation, admin, I hate this stuff. I 100% get ChatGPT to update my scripts. I'm like, cool, this is the tasks that I've come up with. Just plug it all in there and make it sound fancy for me so that I sound like I know what I'm doing. And those things are being read by me anyway. I'm going to pick up inconsistencies and problems with them because I'm the one that is using them. That's why they tend to be less risk. Things like forms and stuff like that are also a good thing, that it's great at just writing the terminology of yes, I agree that you can use my data for whatever. If you do have personally identifiable data, which often will happen in usability studies, it's a good idea to depersonalize it, and scrub it, and that is something that AI can help with. There are tools out there for that. However, I will say be careful, because there are examples out there, blog posts and stuff out there in the wild where people have used these kinds of tools and then essentially their entire study has been made pointless because it's scrubbed the data that they actually wanted to look at. So use caution and make sure that that's not your only version of the data. Find commonalities or themes. Things like word clouds are a great way of being able to use some of these tools to just quickly analyze, say, transcriptions, and then give you a bit of a word cloud so you can visualize what are some of the common themes that came up over and over again. And lastly, AI tools are coming along in leaps and bounds in how they can help us actually analyze the results, right? The dendrogram that I showed you earlier is an absolute pain in the ass to analyze. I don't like doing it. Interpreting it and drawing conclusions from it can be really hard. So AI can assist with interpreting data, particularly where that data is quantitative rather than qualitative. So if your data is essentially stats, then that's where it can actually help you. So what shouldn't we do? Hopefully, it's clear why synthetic users are a terrible idea. They're definitely not a real option yet for UX research, and I don't think they're going to be in the next few years. Particularly for things like usability testing and tree testing, where evaluation of existing decisions is the key goal, there is no replacement for humans. I'm sorry, you still have to talk to humans. AI is still really bad at analyzing video, just by the nature of the way that AI works at analyzing video. AI tools can tell you what page someone went to or what link they clicked on, if it's a working link, but they're not actually watching the video. They're okay at text. That's where AI really excels, is at text still. It's both more expensive and less good at analyzing things like video. And AI just lacks the contextual awareness that is needed to be able to actually analyze a video of how someone's using your product. I mentioned before about avoiding AI summaries, and I stand with this. Often it's going to highlight things that aren't important and miss things that are important, so this is still something that you're better off doing yourself. Or, as I said, use something like word clouds to identify common themes and then go and dig through the transcripts yourself. Jot down notes about things that you think are truly important and then just search for them later. I wish so bad that I could outsource writing the actual tasks that I get people to do when I run usability tests. And every single time I run another usability study, I put my research questions and a bit of context around the thing that I'm testing into ChatGPT and Claude, and I'll usually try it across 3 or 4 different models just to see what answers I get. And I have never once received a task that was usable. It's really, really bad at writing usability tasks. And I know it's not just me because I'm part of a lot of UX communities, and this is the feedback that I've had from every UX professional that works regularly in usability studies. It just really struggles with like not having the context and the nuance to be able to do this well. And as I mentioned before, it's really important that you don't lead people, that you don't introduce information that isn't required when you're writing tasks. All of this stuff is reasons why we hire people who are UX research specialists to do this kind of thing. It's because it is something that does require knowledge on how to do it correctly. And the last thing is facilitation, and I put a little asterisk next to this because I actually think that there are situations in which AI could help with facilitation, but those instances are where we're not using facilitation at all at the moment. And what I mean by facilitation is that when I run a usability study, it's me, it's the person who's doing the study, the participant, and I'm asking them the questions. I'm saying, can you please read out this task for me, and then can you go and do it? And I need you to talk out loud as you're doing the things. And that's a really important part of it because I want to know what's going through their brains as they're doing the thing. The Think Aloud protocol is a big part of what usability testing entails. And that facilitation is not something that can be replaced by an AI bot, because do you think human beings want to talk to an AI bot? Not really, no. And it's hard enough already trying to get people to just monologue while they are doing a usability study. Like, that's already a thing that we have to try and overcome. So trying to do that when the thing that they're talking to is a robot, that's going to be even harder. So I don't think that it's going to replace traditional facilitation anytime soon. But what I do think it can help with is what traditionally has been done as unfacilitated studies, things like tree testing, where we'll often just give them a list of questions and say, go and do these tasks. Perhaps we could have an AI bot next to it that is then going and contextually, if they click on a certain link, asking them, why did you click on this? And is fed in with the knowledge that it needs to know when we need to dig in and pry for more information. I really love this. This is the first rule of usability that we get taught. If you ever study any UX research, is don't listen to users, which might sound the opposite of what I've been saying today, but remember what I said at the start. We don't care what users say so much as what they do, right? UX research should first and foremost always be looking about behavior, not about attitudes. And at least right now, LLMs and AI in general excel in text-based environments. They have the potential to replicate human responses with a fair degree of reproducibility for things that are attitudinal, involve a lot of prior art, and where your audience is representative of what it has been trained on. But they struggle when it comes to representation, eliminating bias, and dynamic contextual analysis. AI is not going to replace your job, but it could make it easier, leaving you to focus on the important bits. These are 4 of the resources where I started my journey down the rabbit hole for this talk. I probably read through about 40 different studies and analyses and expert opinion pieces over the past 3 months while I was writing this talk. But this is where I'd recommend starting if you are interested in any of the stuff that I talked about and you want to go and have a look at some of these studies. And if you want to learn about UX research in general or UX in general, I do recommend going and checking out the Nielsen Norman Group blog. It's free. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I've given them a lot of my own money, but they are constantly releasing new research about UX research. And also on the intersection of UX and AI. So all of the newest studies will be up on the Nielsen Norman blog, and that's where I would start if it's something that you want to keep an eye on. If you just want to yell at me about how bored you were after this talk, this is where you can find me online. And if you've got, I'm not actually sure like how long we've got because we started a little bit late. 1 minute is time? Oh, I've literally got a timer here. Yeah, right. But if you do have questions and you don't come and find me and you would like to ask them, I do have a Slido, so you can scan that and flick it to me and I can reply to it on Slido for you. So thanks for having me, folks. This is officially my last time that I have to do anything while I'm here. I'm delighted, but I will catch you all at the party afterwards, so please do stick around and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks for having me, Greece.